G'day everybody, it's Grizz here. I've got something very, very special for you today. Basically, I was tapped by Sony to be one of 3 Australian outlets to go over and play a world's first exclusive, hands-on, with The Last of Us Part 2, which I'm sure you can imagine I was pretty excited about. Now before I get started, just a few housekeeping things. I want to get right into about 10 minutes worth of exclusive B-roll footage that's been sent to me. However, it did come with the stipulation that I can't just post it as is. Usually on this channel, I like to just post gameplay as is, and just let you guys figure out what you need to know and what you think of it by yourself. And I'm always in the comments section if you want to ask me more questions. But this time, yeah, not allowed to do that. It has to have some sort of voiceover on the top, and so yeah, that's what this is. Also, I should point out that as I'm talking, the scenes in the game and what I'm talking about aren't going to be synced in any way. I basically had 2 sections of the game that I could play. You're going to see just a big intermixing of both. Unfortunately, I'm very pressed for time as I'm recording this. It was quite literally fly 13 hours from Sydney, land, play the game, and then within 24 hours, yeah, I had to produce a whole heap of content. And yeah, this is pretty scattershot stuff, but I did want to get something up and out there because yeah, I mean, it's The Last of Us Part 2. So anyway, let me just start by saying that I had a sort of strange chat with director Neil Druckmann. And I don't know, it's odd to me that he started my exclusive hands-on by explaining why Naughty Dog is making another The Last of Us. Because the 2013 original was a masterpiece in my mind. A sequel felt like a no-brainer. Be that as it may, he said that a lot of people love that game, but some folks thought that it could and should just stand on its own. I mean, it won countless Game of the Year awards, it has a massive fan base, and at last official count, I mean, it sold over 17 million copies. Probably well beyond that, but hasn't been officially reported. And none of those things, according to Druckmann, are the reasons to make the game that I'm about to spend 3 hours playing, The Last of Us Part 2. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with them, Naughty Dog is a studio that's in a very lucky and privileged position with Sony. The publisher basically lets this team make whatever game they're excited about. Now, with The Last of Us, they felt compelled to tell another story that had an emotional core. Druckmann felt like this world, these characters, in this entertainment medium were a perfect fit for another dark story that he had in mind for Part 2. Now, The Last of Us, if you never played it, and I really recommend you do because there's going to be spoilers from this point onward, and you don't want to ruin a game that good. But The Last of Us was essentially about the love between a parent and a child. More specifically, that unconditional love that can drive you mad. I know that the parents out there listening to this will just know what I'm talking about immediately. The kind of sacrifice you'd be prepared to make for your child at any given moment if they're in danger. This concept and the philosophical questions that stemmed off of that concept are what helped Naughty Dog to shape the original story of The Last of Us. The gameplay, the music, all of those aspects came together to make this philosophical argument of, okay, well, how far would you go to protect your loved one? By the end of the first game, we saw Joel willing to sacrifice his own well-being, the people close to him, basically all of mankind, and even his relationship with his surrogate daughter, just to protect her. So it was this exploration of a universal primal feeling that led to a lot of that original production. In this game, however, Naughty Dog is still focusing on a story that's about love, but also a fair amount of hate. Druckmann told me that he wanted to talk about this idea of rage and anger and how closely they can actually be to love. Basically, this sequel is the flip side. Part 2 involves a calamity of some description, and it's going to evoke this feeling of, okay, well, how far would you go to avenge the people that you love? And then the obvious follow-on from that is, well, what is the cost of all that hate, you know? What would undertaking the worst eye for an eye campaign do to you as a person? And would there be any coming back from that? These are the philosophical questions that you'll soon have to face. Now, Druckmann says, and without giving too much away, he landed on a narrative that he thinks is a really unique take on a revenge story. It deals with the cycle of violence, the idea that one violent act doesn't exist in a vacuum. Cryptically, he also says that his team is doing something that can only be done in a video game. So that'll be interesting to see what that is. Now, for those of you who missed the first game, Here's a super short recap. We're 25 years into a cordyceps infection that turned most of mankind into these roaming, infected cannibals. The few survivors left are either marauding scumbags who, when they're not picking peanuts out of poo, are trying to rape or murder innocent travellers. Other folks are more moral, and they belong to these sort of enclaves of civilization that sometimes go to extremes to survive in this new reality. One of these places is Jackson, Wyoming, and it's the refuge of a civil society where we ended the previous adventure. Ellie is now 19, and she's been through this traumatic journey with a ruthless survivor named Joel. They bonded together, and he basically taught her how to shiv to live. That said, now she's trying to live in this town that has a school. She has friends, she can have hobbies. She also has a best friend named Dina that she has a crush on, and she can live almost a normal life now. At least until this mysterious event, shall we call it, that turns her world upside down and sets her on this road to brutal retribution. Now, none of this is spoiler stuff. If you've been tracking the trailers, you just know that something bad is going to happen, and Ellie's going to get very, very pissed off. Now, I was lucky enough to play 2 full chapters of that journey, 3 hours of gameplay total. The first chapter of the demo is essentially like a day in the life of Ellie and Dina. They're on this rotating roster to go out on patrols outside of town. They essentially need to spot threats, marauders are infected, and neutralize them if it's a small deal. If not, they have to tactically retreat and call for aid. It's very early in the game, and it's filled with tutorials, but I was quickly impressed by these wider spaces to explore, and it's got this horse riding action that's basically on par with Red Dead Redemption 2. The second slice of gameplay is from much later on, post-Calamity. Ellie is pissed off and on the hunt. Her journey has led her to Seattle, a former quarantine zone that is now controlled by the WLF, and their detractors call them wolves. These guys could charm the paint off walls. They're essentially xenophobes who just kill anybody who stumble into their path. Somehow Ellie has found her way into their city, and now she's trying to prevent a group of them from hunting down and killing her friend, Tommy. Druckmann says this is much later in the game and the setups are much more challenging, but thankfully I'm given a lot more tools at my disposal. You'll see it from the footage, it's very reminiscent of the Suburbs section from the first game. Really intense, a lot of combat, or stealth, or you can just try to sprint through. Very, very good stuff. But yeah, narratively, that's all I really want to spoil. But I would like to offer some pro tips. Firstly, Ellie feels just more athletic and agile than Joel was. That, and you now have a dedicated jump button that opens up vertical opportunities, both in combat and those sort of kleptomania sprees when you're looking for crafting items. It's not a very gamey sort of jump, thankfully. You can't just stand there and just hammer the button and she'll jump 6 feet off the ground. It's not a Jak and Daxter game. But there's also a crouch button, and that actually doubles as a prone button if you hold it. So scooting under cars is this very useful tactic, and you can even just hide away under a car and still use your crafting abilities down there. Ellie just sort of flips on her back and, just gets making stuff. What else? Part 2 uses analog stealth, and the AI has been, I'd say, vastly improved. As you get lower with the prone button and the crouching, you are obviously less visible, and grass will help you, but not fully conceal you. There's also a dedicated dodge button on L1 that can help you to avoid getting new scars and speed holes when you're up against somebody with an axe. Dodging also makes ranged enemies less accurate, but yeah, you're not Neo, so don't get too cocky there. Next up, there's a more advanced version of the Listen mode from the first game. This effectively lets you see enemies behind walls, but the farther away folks sort of appear like these ambiguous grey blobby X-ray things, whereas closer foes are more sharply defined, so you can tell which way they're facing and what they're up to. Be that as it may, you won't always see threats coming at you in this adventure. And I won't spoil it, but Naughty Dog has to be commended for just upping their jump scare game here. I was really impressed. I should also like to warn you about dogs. The WLF just love their attack pooches, and I do mean love. When you kill them, the enemies let out this pitiful wail as their best friend dies. And the guilt gets worse when you then execute the dog's handler, only to hear that that person's best friend is shrieking out their name and calling you a murderous bitch. It's just confronting. It's such a little thing, but yeah, man, it gets you. Lastly, the biggest tip I can give you is this: running away is encouraged. If you're overwhelmed, you can just bail, re-establish stealth, and then go at the group from a different vector. You're always sort of hideously outnumbered. I mean, you can go guerrilla style or just avoid them altogether, either by being a ghost or by just running for your dear life. Personally, I played this entire section loud, like a third-person action shooter. I then compared notes with my other two Aussie colleagues who played, one of them played stealth, and another just did this mad Benny Hill run straight through it. All of these tactics were viable, but the latter one was just looked insanely intense. I wouldn't recommend it. Moving on, there's also a lot to be said for crafting items via your backpack menu, like trip and smoke mines are really good. Alternatively, you can enhance your personal skills and steer Ellie into your personal playstyle via enhancement pills. None of that's new, but there's some interesting little new perks going on there. Ellie is also just an absolute gunsmith. You can find a workbench and just a shitload of scrap and just pimp out your shotgun, and I'd recommend doing that because the one I had, man, it was like one trigger pull and it was just turning people into half-eaten gingerbread men. The gore in this is just next level. It's insane. That being said, you should also explore. There are so many nooks and crannies off this beaten path. I saw no sort of sandboxes per se, but this game has really taken the blinkers off when you talk about explorable areas. They're at least twice as big as what you knew from the other game. And yeah, you basically just stop and smell the roses and you'll get optional dialogue aplenty, environmental stories, collectibles, and just these sealed basements full of enemies that want to jack in the box onto your jugular. I found some hidey holes that a lot of the other critics just didn't, and they were filled with this new mutant enemy type called Shamblers. And the best way to explain them, I mean, you'll see it in this footage here, they're like this 7-foot tall thing that has no head due to the world's worst tumour. And once they're alerted, they just seem to know where you are at all times. They're not very quick, but if they get close, they just fart out this lethal gas that lasts forever and just goes through cover as well. Oh yeah, and when you do kill one, they explode into that crap as well. It's lovely. So yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, The Last of Us Part 2, I think, is just shaping up to be something truly special. I mean, I absolutely loved the original, replayed it like 5 or 6 times, grounded difficulty, obviously. I wanted to do that with this code, but unfortunately they wouldn't let me. But yeah, I went in with the absolute highest of expectations, and they were met. You can see for yourself, the visuals here just set a new benchmark. The new motion matching animation technique makes the on-screen action just look eerily lifelike. Likewise, the combat is white-knuckle stuff, be it desperate shootouts in the streets, or just a series of bunghole puckering melee brawls in dank suburban dungeons. I mean, this game just sets a new level when it comes to intensity. And, more importantly than all of that, it just feels great in your hands through the controller. Flawless, I'd say. Even in this incomplete state, I saw 0 hiccups. I mean, basically my instincts are telling me that this has got Game of the Year carved all over it. Like, deep. I'm basically planning to buy this harrowing, surely can't end well adventure on day 1 of release. And I'm guessing day 2 is just going to be a therapy session. Because wow, this is going to hit hard. I don't know where it's going, but it's going to hit me very, very hard. Anyway, that's all I have for you at the moment. Thanks for stopping by, as always. And yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to drop into the comments section. I'll try to answer what I can. And I've also got an interview with the lead animator on the channel as well. Awesome game. You're going to love it. Thanks for stopping by. See you later.